Since the dawn of man, there has been but one thing to divide generations, gender, and the very fabric of our existence. God trembles under the weight of its own creation and casts hellfire on all those that revel in its incredible magnitude. And that is video game controversy. On a real note though, Postal used to be a slightly divisive game, to say the absolute least. I mean, Joe Lieberman presented the original game to the US Senate in 1997, saying it was one of the 3 worst things in America at the time, with the other 2 being Marilyn Manson and Calvin Klein underwear ads, for some reason. Mind you, there were 5 mass shootings that year and 2 bomb plots, so I don't really think the man had his priorities in order. Either way, the game doesn't exactly warrant the same controversial attention nowadays, with recent controversies seemingly revolving around predatory business practices and softcore gambling, which is probably for the best, to be honest, with the modern games industry seemingly wringing out the consumer like a mouldy towel soaked in 100-year-old scotch. This game series, though, was once the most controversial of its time, with the namesake being reference to the coined phrase of going postal, as opposed to being a game where you actually deliver mail, as interesting as that would have been. The game follows the plot of the creatively named Postal dude, who goes on a massive life reversal spree after discovering that the town of Paradise has been infected with a substance that makes the population absolutely insane. He also got evicted, as if believing you're the only sane person in a town resembling George Romero's The Crazies just wasn't quite enough. This all predictably turns out to be a rug pull though, as in the end, Postal Dude was crazy all along, and the game pushes the message that the complexities and stresses of the modern world can lead a man to insanity. And you know what? Fair enough. Postal 2, however, follows a slightly different plot, with the entire game revolving around completing errands for your wife on a daily basis, with such genre-defining tasks as getting milk from the shop and returning books to the library. This all escalates to a point that I can't even summarize, so I'm going to directly quote the Postal wiki here, because I can't do a better summary than this. After carrying out these tasks, which almost get Postal Dude wound up in jail or killed, Paradise erupts into complete carnage, allegedly due to his actions over the week. As he walks home, he witnesses civilians and law enforcement battle it out while cats fall from the sky. He arrives home safely. However, it turns out that he forgot one last item to get for his wife, and therefore he shoots himself in the head to stop listening to her nagging. Fucking based. However, now that I've given you a brief rundown of the 2 most popular games, I should probably actually get into the meat of this video. So there's this guy, right? His name's Vince Desiderio. He's a high school teacher in New York turned taxi driver turned studio manager. Wild portfolio, I know. Until one day he quits all this and gets hired by a Wall Street recruitment agency in the early 1980s as a recruiter. This all carries on as normal until one fateful job would fall upon his desk. Find talent for a massive company that was dominating the tech market at the time. Atari. He gradually became rather close with the company, becoming a full-time consultant for them until one day he decided that he wanted to move further into the tech world. Meanwhile, an RIT dropout by the name of Mike Reidel, would find himself on the other side of his desk. Fresh talent for the booming company that is Atari. The 2 found themselves becoming friends in the financially stable house of... Atari was going downhill faster than the 2023 NFT market. A new business venture was in order. Q Riedel Software Productions, founded in 1986 by, you guessed it, these 2 mugs. They started out as a tiny studio making edutainment games that shook the gaming scene and carved a chunk out of history for the legendary video game company that was RSP. These games, Tom and Jerry, the Bugs Bunny Harebrained Adventure, Sesame Street, Big Bird's Hide and Seek, Free Willy, and lest we forget, unnamed edutainment game. Due to the company's success in edutainment and several factors relating to New York City, probably rent, in 1991, Desi and Riedel decided an office relocation was in order. Several places were under consideration, including Albuquerque, New Mexico, which kind of made me laugh. Amusingly, however, when Desi and Riedel arrived at JFK Airport before their departure to Arizona, one of the 4 people working for RSP at the time just didn't show up for the meetup, which is slightly inconvenient given the fact that they were 25% of the company's workforce. Furthermore, the other employee quit just 2 weeks after the relocation, leaving RSP in the hands of Riedel and Desi. It's important to mention at this time that Vince Desi was not a programmer, and had little interest in video games, so all the creative operations fell in the hands of Riedel, the poor guy. Somehow though, the company pulled out of this pit, hired more staff, and continued as normal. These ventures would actually go on to make the company a sizable amount of money, and do more than enough to keep themselves afloat. But that wasn't enough for good old Chief Big Dick, as he was bored. Very bored. He didn't want to carry on making the same low-calorie, child-friendly edutainment games. He wanted to make something new, something adult, something cool, something Postal. And in 1996, he actually decided to do something about it. The company, Running with Scissors, was founded that very same year, with the plan being to fund upcoming adult projects that the team wanted to make with the money generated by RSP's edutainment games. Development was split between 3 teams within the 2 companies. One team working on Free Willy, one team working on Untitled Edutainment Game, and the final team, working under the name of Running with Scissors, were making the future prodigy of this company. Now the question you're probably asking is, what is that unnamed edutainment game? And in all honesty, I have no idea. I've tried to find it, tried to research more into it, but I've come up at a loss. All I know about this stupid project is that it was made for an academic publisher. That is all I've got. So if you know any more, please enlighten me in the comments while reminding me why I should quit YouTube. Now, Postal was quite literally an attempt to make the most outrageous game they possibly could, inspired by an arcade cabinet of Robotron 2084 that was playable in the RSP offices back in New York. And by 1997, they were developing the game and filed the trademark for the title. This led to a lovely counterfiling of that same trademark by the United States Postal Service of all things, claiming that they had plans of moving into the video game industry apparently under the intended name of Postal, which is rather strange as the phrase going postal was coined when their offices got shot up. During this counter-filing, the Postmaster General at the time sent Running with Scissors a letter condemning the game's theme. But I'm sure all of this was an honest attempt at making a United States Postal Service game about delivering mail, and not a vague protest of the game and its content. Thanks USPS for keeping us safe one violent video game at a time. With this legal battle raging on in the background, Postal 1 would release in November of that same year, under the publishing label of Ripcord Games, a subsidiary of Panasonic. The game would be received impeccably well by the public and the media, with Joe from earlier saying the whole worst thing in America stuff, and Comp USA and Walmart outright refusing to sell the game. Regardless of these facts, however, the game still sold over 10,000 units in the first week, which for the time is very good, and an estimated 100,000 units in Europe under the Take-Two Interactive label. Why such a big difference in regional sales? I'm not sure. Could be the Walmart thing, could be the theme, couldn't really find anything about that. Maybe Take-Two is just a better publisher. Running with Scissors, though, had cemented themselves in pop culture immediately with their very first game, and were on track to be something successful, like the Rockstar Games of 1997. They followed up the success with an expansion to the game with Special Delivery in 1998. I'm sure the USPS loved that one. Adding 4 new levels and allowed the player to do a whole list of new activities, like winning lawsuits, taking the homeless off the streets, and saving staff spending for the American Red Cross. In all seriousness though, from what I could find, the people who enjoyed the base game very much enjoyed the expansion, with one Amazon review saying the writing was simple yet tasteful, apparently. Vince Desi would eventually realise just how powerful this controversy was, and ran with it. After the release of Postal, Vince went from saying, "Funny thing is, the original Postal was taken far more seriously than we designed or intended," and "controversy was never a part of the plan," to giving 30 journalists reporting on the game real firearms and riding in the co-pilot seat of a rented aeroplane blackout drunk. This evidently became the right move though, as controversy does sell, as proven by his appearance on TV defending against claims of video game violence. When the governor he was arguing with read the advert, the switchboard lit up with members of the public asking where they could actually buy the game. The only downside, I guess, is that people would spit on him when he wore the Running with Scissors t-shirt in public. Yes, that actually happened. After the stratospheric launch of Postal and its expansions, Running with Scissors immediately started drafting their next game. Postal 2. Nah, just kidding. It was actually some weird 3D sci-fi shooter called Guardian. The game actually had a rather expansive lore, detailing a fighter joining the Umbres in resistance to the Nullids' plan to eat the human race, with the game leaning heavily on motion capture, apparently, in 1999. Anyway, this concept would eventually be canned, however, and replaced with the concept Flesh and Wire, a game where a cop wakes up and realizes his legs are being eaten by a giant blob. But instead of going to a doctor and removing said blob, he realizes he can control it, and uses it in various fun gameplay scenarios, with Desi describing it as unintentionally funny. The game actually got as far as an announced release date, with a lineup of consoles including the Dreamcast, PS2 and GameCube. Sadly though, the game would actually be canned, as Panasonic Interactive Media went under and the subsidiary Ripcord Games became independent. In a lovely move, Ripcord dropped their support of Flash and Wire despite running with scissors, sinking a whole $1.5 million into the nearly completed game. They couldn't find another label to publish the game, so sadly dropped the project entirely. This wasn't all bad though, as this led to the company focusing on the sequel to Postal later in 1999. While brainstorming concepts for this sequel, however, Gary Coleman became a talking point, with all of them agreeing he would be a good fit for the game's plot and theme. They called him up with little expectation for an agreement, and the dude actually wanted to be in the game, and ended up voicing himself. A goal for the second Postal game was to actually make its humor more evident, so it would reach a wider audience. Which I suppose it half accomplished, as although it has some themes and segments that are rather interesting to say the least, you can do a pacifist run of the game while completing every mission with the whole spousal errand structure. So, A+ for trying, I guess. Either way, during development, a Japan exclusive for the original Postal would be released in 2000, and there were talks with Uwe Boll about a potential Postal movie. Although Uwe Boll had a slightly mixed reputation, with all of his movies being average at best, Vince Desi liked his attitude, I guess. Aside from that, things were relatively quiet, until 2003 when USPS's counter trademark would be thrown out of court with prejudice, and Postal 2 would finally drop, only to be shortly banned in 13 countries and later banned in New Zealand and Australia. This, however, wouldn't hurt the game too much, as Desi struck a deal with SoftWrap to have the game published online to bypass the bans. The game was an immediate success, being Linux Games Publishing's fastest selling game in the first month. Due to Postal 2's popularity, Whiptail Interactive would release Postal, Classic and Uncut, in August of the same year. Share the Pain, a multiplayer expansion, would also be released, along with several other expansions in 2005 and 2006. This included the fan-made Apocalypse Weekend and A Week in Paradise. Okay, back to the movie for a sec. I actually kinda lied a bit. Kind of, anyways, accounts are very differing, so I'm gonna pick the most interesting side and run with it. According to Uwe Boll, a German fan club for the Postal series contacted him asking if he'd be interested in making a film adaptation of the games. Uwe Boll then researched the games and came to the conclusion that the fan club had just given him solid gold, and fell in love with the absolute absurdity of the games. He then proceeded to reach out to Vince Desi, and Desi actually sold him the rights for a movie adaptation, under the condition that Vince would actually have a hand in the script and production. Vince and the director of Postal 2, Steve Wick, pitched a much darker version of the Postal story, but Boll said nah in pursuit of comedy, rejecting the subtext of Postal being a mockery of internalized heroism in heinous acts. And then we ended up with this piece of shit. Now I'm going to read the Wikipedia summary for the first scene. The film begins with a prologue, showing Asif and Nabi, a fictional portrayal of two of the Flight 11 hijackers during the 9/11 attacks, debating the number of virgins they get as a reward for carrying out the attacks. After a long debate, they decide to call Osama bin Laden, their leader, to find out the exact amount. Osama then tells them that there are not enough virgins to go around, and upon hearing this, the two hijackers abandon the attack in dismay and happily change their flight paths to the Bahamas. And you know what? Yeah, that is definitely a movie. Now, with the success of Postal 2, Desi and the company decided to keep this train rolling, and immediately drew up plans for Postal 3. This somehow led to a deal being made with the Russian publisher Akella, running with scissors making the script, music, design, and character development in the game, and Akella's developers, fittingly named Trash Masters, handling the programming and art production. All would continue as normal, with the groundwork being laid for an actually promising game, as this wasn't Akella's first rodeo, with them being directly involved in the publishing of both the first and second Postal game. This would all carry on as normal until 2008 came around, and the Great Recession did its lovely wiping of trillions of dollars from global shares, with Russia being hit especially hard. Due to the whole not having any money thing, the development of Postal 3 was largely downscaled. That wouldn't stop them though, as in 2011, Postal 3 would finally release. The only downside was that everyone hated the game so much that it was pulled from stores in 2012, and Akella only went on to make one final game, Sea Dogs, to each his own, before going completely defunct. You know what they say, you mess with the Desi, you get the messy. The messy collapse of your entire company, job, and way of life. Rest in peace, Akella. I guess we'll never get to see Age of Pirates 3 or Disciples 4. Either way, pulling the third game from stores was probably for the best, with many people at the time saying it had terrible shooting, terrible movement, and somehow even more terrible AI. IGN liked it, I guess, but in all honesty, I think they would give their own slow descent into irrelevance a solid 7 out of 10, so who am I to judge their unending positivity? Running with Scissors didn't want to leave the book open on that page, however, so in 2015 came out with the titular Paradise Lost, containing Postal 2 and all of the expansions, and on Steam no less. This was actually very good for the game, as it brought the series to a new generation of impressionable gamers ready to quell their need for violence and blood for a solid 7 to 12 hours of gameplay, and even more with various challenge modes. After the hit of the 2015 release on Steam, Running with Scissors would continue this theme of releases, with a remake of the original Postal in 2016, and another anniversary compilation in 2017. In the background, however, Running with Scissors were working on a new game, a better game, Postal 4. During this time, Running with Scissors were also working with developers Hyperstrange and Creative Forge to make a spin-off, Postal, Brain Damage, a more arcadey, level-based boomer shooter kind of thing. Now going back to Postal 4, the game would eventually drop in early access in 2019. The reception was pretty mixed, with some people saying the building blocks to a competent game were definitely there, and others saying it was horrifically outdated. Regardless of this, development would continue until its final release at the end of 2022. Now, although the game is technically released, future updates are planned, and the game isn't exactly dead in the water. This is good, as the game is pretty much empty in a lot of ways, and missing a lot of potential. With any luck though, this will all be fulfilled in future updates. Back to Brain Damage, this game would actually be released in 2022 as well, but to a great reception, having next to nothing to do with Postal 4. Now generally, games companies don't tend to release two games from the same IP around the same time, as they'll directly compete with each other. Unless you're Game Freak, of course, but they do share a lot in common with the Postal spin-off's title. Was this a good idea? Well, it's early 2023 at the moment, so I guess we'll just have to see. And as uncomfortable as it is to leave this video on a slight cliffhanger, the history of this company is still in progress. And I honestly do hope it works out for them, as counterculture is as important now as it ever was, lest we disappear further and further up our own collective arses. Although the counterculture Running with Scissors is depicting is ever so slightly out of date, it's still important nonetheless, and is living proof that controversy does sell. What are my closing remarks? It would be nice if there was a new IP depicting more relevant counterculture, as the only recent counterculture I can find on Google is Andrew Tate, a misogynistic incel virgin oligarch with a head shinier than his seized Bugatti, and apparently BLM. And if protesting police brutality is counterculture, then we sure do live in an interesting time. Anyway, subscribe if you swing that way, and as they say in France, bye.